In 1953, a farm family in rural Ohio walked into town on a Saturday morning with a nickel in one pocket and a running tab in the ledger book at the counter. That nickel bought a Coca-Cola, or a candy bar, or a small paper sack of penny candy scooped by hand. Today, that same nickel wouldn't buy anything at all. But back then, our grandparents knew things we've forgotten. How to stiffen a collar with a spoonful of powder, how to seal a jar of peaches so it lasted the whole winter. Today, 25 things that once sat on general store shelves and counters across small-town America. And wait until you hear about the tin every farm family kept for cracked hands, right alongside the cattle. Then there was the flour sack, or the feed sack, depending on what your family kept in the barn. Picture a mother in her farmhouse kitchen sorting through a stack of printed cotton sacks, matching the little flowers and checks so she could piece together a dress for her daughter. It wasn't scrap fabric to her, it was material, plain and simple, and nothing went to waste. The mills knew exactly what they were doing. Once the flour or feed was used up, that cotton sack became fabric for the household, and the company started printing flowers and checks right onto the cloth, knowing full well where it would end up. Some mills even coordinated their patterns, so 3 matching sacks, bought on 3 separate trips to the store, gave a mother just enough cloth to sew 1 full dress for her girl. That's the kind of quiet ingenuity that doesn't get written into the history books. And once that new dress was finished and worn a time or two, it needed washing, which meant another trip to the store, this time for something a good deal less pretty than printed cotton. Every kitchen had them, lined up on a shelf in the cellar or the pantry, the ball mason jars, glowing amber and red with home-canned beans, tomatoes and peaches, put up in August to see the family through the long winter ahead. You remember the sight of that shelf, don't you? Rows of jars catching the light like something worth being proud of, because it was. The jar itself was simple but clever, a reusable glass body topped with a 2-piece metal lid. You filled it with whatever the garden had given up that season, wiped the rim clean, set the lid on snug, and boiled it in a water bath until the seal popped tight. That little pop was a sound every canning mother listened for, because it meant the food inside would keep. Ball had been making jars that way since the 1880s, and by the 1950s, that name on the glass was as familiar as the family Bible. My favorite of them all might be the bar of Fell's Naphtha soap, sitting by the wash sink in nearly every home. Picture a woman grating that bar into a pot of hot water before scrubbing her husband's work shirts by hand, working out the grease and grass stains that plain soap wouldn't touch. Old-timers claimed the same bar could take the sting out of poison ivy, though you'll notice nobody ever printed that on the wrapper. That soap is still made today, nearly unchanged, which is more than you can say for most things from back then. As I mentioned, there was a tin every farm family kept for cracked hands, right alongside the cattle. That was bag balm. A little green tin sat on the kitchen windowsill, used first on the cow's cracked udders after milking, and just as often rubbed into a farmer's own chapped hands come winter. It was a thick lanolin ointment, worked into raw or cracked skin with the fingers until it soaked in fully. One tin doing double duty for the barn and the household says something about how families made do. Nothing was bought for just one purpose if it could serve 2. And then there was mercurochrome, which every kid old enough to run and fall knew by its sting. A boy comes in from playing with a skinned knee, and his mother reaches for the little glass bottle with the applicator built right into the cap. She paints the cut with that orange-red medicine while he braces himself, eyes shut tight. That glass wand let a parent dab it right onto a scrape without ever touching the wound. It fell out of use later on, after concerns arose about the mercury it contained, and it disappeared from store shelves for good by the century's end. Then there was iodine, sitting right next to the mercurochrome on that same shelf. It was the older, harsher remedy, the one our grandparents had grown up with themselves, so they trusted it without a second thought. A dab from that small brown bottle, straight onto a scrape, and you knew it right away. It stung worse than mercurochrome, no question, but that wasn't really the point. It left a brown stain on the skin that lasted for days, and some kids actually showed it off at school the next morning, like a badge of honor. You might remember wearing one yourself. It wasn't about the sting. It was proof you'd survived whatever scrape you'd gotten into, and every mother on the block reached for the same brown bottle when the moment called for it. Every washroom in town, it seemed, had a box of 20 Mule Team Borax sitting near the washboard. If you grew up then, you know that picture on the front, the Mule Team hauling their load, better than you know some of your own relatives' faces, because you saw it every single wash day of your childhood. Fetching that box down from the shelf for your mother was practically a rite of passage. A scoop of that powder went right into the wash water, and it made a real difference, especially in homes where the water ran hard and mineral heavy, as it did in so many small towns. It softened the water and helped the whites come out brighter. The name itself told a story. Old-timers said it was named for the actual mule teams once used to haul the borax out of the mines. It was thrift and pride rolled into one plain cardboard box. Once the whites were washed, though, there was still one more step before they ever made it onto the line. My favorite of them all might be Mrs. Stewart's bluing, that little blue bottle that seemed almost magical to a child watching it work. Her grandmother would add just a few careful drops to the rinse water, and you'd watch the color swirl through and then vanish completely, like it was never there at all. She was following a trick her own mother had shown her, passed down the same quiet way most household wisdom was back then. That small amount of bluing in the final rinse counteracted the natural yellowing that white cotton picks up over time, keeping shirts and sheets looking crisp instead of dingy. It wasn't fancy science to the people using it. It was just something their mothers had taught them, and it worked. The brand itself had been around since 1883, which meant generations of women had stood at that same washtub doing the very same thing. Nobody makes a fuss over bluing anymore, but for decades, it was the quiet secret behind every bright white Sunday shirt. Every kitchen had a box of Argo starch tucked in a drawer somewhere, ready for Sunday night. A wife would set up the ironing board and mix that powdered starch with water in a bowl, dipping a shirt collar in before pressing it stiff and smooth for her husband's Monday morning at the mill. It was quiet, careful work, done after the children were in bed, and nobody thought twice about the effort it took. The starch was mixed into a liquid and brushed or dipped onto collars and cuffs before ironing, and it gave dress shirts that crisp, stiff look that was simply expected for church or for work, no exceptions. A limp collar said something about a household, whether that was fair or not. What's remarkable is how little that box has changed. The packaging today looks almost exactly the same as it did back then. One of the few things from that shelf you could still recognize instantly. Then there was number 10 on our list, and for a lot of families, this one meant something a little different. S&H green stamps. At the register, the clerk would tear off a strip of stamps based on how much you'd spent, and a mother would tuck them carefully into her purse to paste into a book later that evening at the kitchen table. Each little page filled in was one page closer to something the family actually wanted. Stamps earned per purchase were licked and pasted, book after book, then redeemed at a separate stamp store or catalog once you'd filled enough of them, maybe for a new toaster or a set of dishes for the table. At their peak, old-timers say S&H reportedly printed more stamps than the entire U.S. Postal Service, which tells you just how deep this habit ran into everyday American life. Some families saved those books for months on end, patient and steady, the very same way children saved something else entirely, pennies, one at a time, for the candy counter. Then there was the penny candy counter, and if you grew up back then, you remember exactly where it stood. Right along the front of the store, a whole row of tall glass jars catching the light. A child clutching a penny, sometimes a whole nickel, got to point through the glass, and the clerk would scoop the chosen pieces by hand into a small paper sack. It wasn't pre-bagged, weighed out, or priced by the pound. It was picked, one piece at a time, by a child deciding carefully what mattered most. For a lot of folks, that was the very first purchase they ever made entirely on their own. No parent choosing for them, no list to follow. Just a coin in a small hand, and a decision that felt enormous at the time. Nobody scoops candy from a jar like that anymore. It's a small thing to miss, but plenty of us do. Every corner store had a jar of Bazooka bubblegum too, that thick pink brick wrapped up tight with a tiny comic strip folded inside. A boy might unwrap one on the walk home from the store, and more often than not, he'd get to the comic before he even thought about chewing the gum. Those little comics became their own kind of currency among kids. They'd trade favorites, collect the ones that made them laugh, and hang on to them long after the gum itself had gone hard and lost all its flavor. It was a small piece of paper, but it was worth something to a child, and that's a kind of wealth that doesn't show up in any ledger. My favorite of them all might have been the wax lips and the little wax soda bottles, sitting right there near the register. A girl might bite into one of those tiny wax bottles, sucking out the sweet syrup inside before she ever thought to chew on the wax itself, like gum. A nickel's worth of novelty, and somehow it lasted the whole walk home. The trick was in stretching it out. You bit the wax shell open, drank the flavored syrup hidden inside, and then chewed the wax itself afterward, like it was gum. One small treat turned into two. It's the kind of quiet ingenuity our grandparents just took for granted. Nothing wasted, not even the wrapper of a wax candy. Every kitchen had a shelf for Cracker Jack too, and Saturdays at a ball game or right off the store shelf, a family might open a box together, the kids digging past the caramel popcorn and the peanuts for the small prize buried down at the bottom. That little toy tucked inside every box was a decades-old gimmick by then, but it never lost its pull. A nickel snack turned into a small treasure hunt, and for a child, finding that prize mattered every bit as much as the popcorn and the peanuts did. And on a hot afternoon there was Kool-Aid, sold in a little nickel packet at the store. A mother would tear one open and stir it into a pitcher of water and sugar out on the porch, because back then, the powder itself came unsweetened straight out of the packet. Because it came unsweetened, that sugar had to be measured and stirred in by hand along with the water, which meant a pitcher of Kool-Aid was a small kitchen project, not just a simple pour. Nobody thinks twice about that today, but back then, it was one more little task a mother did without complaint, and a family gathered around for it just the same. Then there was the roll of Necco wafers riding along in a grandfather's coat pocket. He'd peel one off at a time and hand it back to the grandchildren on the seat behind him, making a trip to the store last as long as he could stretch it. Those chalky pastel discs came stacked in a plain paper roll, and you popped the wrong flavor first if you weren't careful. They cost just a few cents at the counter. Nothing fancy about the wrapping at all. What's remarkable is how long they'd already been around by the 50s. Necco wafers were one of the oldest continuously produced candies in the whole country, and that grandfather likely tasted the same candy as a boy himself. Every general store kept a roll of Lifesavers sitting right by the register, close enough for a father to grab on his way out the door. A nickel bought the roll, and he'd toss it into the truck where the kids were waiting. No ceremony to it at all, just a small kindness folded into an errand. They came wrapped simple in foil, nothing more than that. Small enough to ride in a shirt pocket or sit in a glove box for the drive home. They were the kind of treat nobody made a fuss over because everybody could afford one. And maybe that's the quiet part of it. A nickel candy meant a father could say yes without even thinking twice. My favorite of them all might be the simple wooden clothespin, because it says so much about how families made do. A mother pinning wet sheets to the line behind the house always had a cloth bag of clothespins hanging nearby on a nail, refilled from the general store whenever the old ones split or wandered off. They were sold loose, by the bag, nothing special about them, and that was exactly the point. In a decade, when most rural homes still had no electric dryer, that line strung across the yard was the dryer, and the clothespin was the only tool that made it work. You might remember the particular snap of one giving way in the wind, and the scramble across the grass to catch what it dropped. You might remember the washboard leaning in the corner of the kitchen, because in a house without a washing machine, that corrugated metal board was the machine. A woman would kneel over a tub of water, scrubbing shirt collars against those ridges again and again until her knuckles ached from it. There was no shortcut to it. You rubbed the fabric against the metal or glass surface to work the soap through, over and over, load after load. It was slow, honest work, done on a set day of the week, whether the weather cooperated or not. Nobody complained about it out loud, but nobody who lived it forgets the sound of that scrubbing either, a rhythm as familiar as any clock in the house. And if you grew up in a home without a refrigerator, you remember the little printed card set in the front window, numbers turned just so, telling the iceman how many pounds to bring in that day. He'd haul the block through the door with a pair of steel tongs, gripping it tight so it wouldn't slip on the walk from the truck. That card in the window did the talking before he ever knocked. It was the whole order, right there for him to read from the street. The tongs did the heavy work, carrying that dripping block straight to the icebox before it could melt away on the kitchen floor. Homes waiting on the iceman were often the very same homes still lighting their evenings a different way, without electricity to count on either. Then there was kerosene, sold right out of a big drum by the gallon. If your home wasn't wired for electricity yet, and plenty in the country weren't, you knew the routine well. A child might be sent to the store with an empty can, told to carry it home upright and steady, careful not to spill a drop on the walk back. That kerosene, or coal oil as some called it, filled the lamps that would light the whole evening, from supper to bedtime stories. The clerk measured it out gallon by gallon, poured straight from the drum spigot into whatever can you'd brought from home. It's easy to forget now, but for a lot of families, a full can of kerosene was just as essential as a full icebox. Every general store had that red tin sitting behind the counter, right next to the register, Prince Albert pipe tobacco. Men picked it up on their weekly trip to town, a flat little pocket tin that fit neatly in a shirt pocket, meant for the pipe smokers of the house. But if you grew up then, you probably remember it for something else entirely. Kids loved the old prank call, dialing up the store, straight-faced, and asking, "Do you have Prince Albert in a can?" Old-timers say that gag went on for years, store owners in on the joke as much as anybody. It's a small thing, a tin of tobacco, but it's tangled up with some of the best laughs a lot of us ever got out of a party line telephone. My favorite of them all might be the snuff tin, small and round, tucked away near the pipe tobacco and cigars. You'd see the same older man come in every week, ask for his usual, and slip that little tin straight into his shirt pocket, same as he'd done for as long as anybody in town could remember. Inside was finely ground tobacco meant for dipping, and buying it wasn't some special occasion. It was just part of the rhythm of the week, steady as the mail. There was a quiet comfort in those routines, the same face, the same order, the same nod to the clerk. Nobody thought twice about it back then. It was just one more small, familiar habit that held a town together, one Saturday at a time. Then there were the nails and screws, and if you grew up on a farm, you remember they never came in a little plastic bag like today. They sat loose in open wooden bins, all different sizes, waiting to be scooped out by hand. A farmer might come in with nothing but a scrap of paper, a list scratched out for a fence repair, and hand it across the counter. The clerk would scoop the right nails from the bin, pour them onto the store scale, and weigh out exactly what was needed before pouring the whole lot into a paper sack. Nothing was counted out one by one. It was sold by weight, plain and simple. It's a small thing, but it says something about how self-reliant folks had to be, fixing what broke with whatever the store scale allowed. And last, there was the cheese wheel, sitting proud under a glass dome right on the counter. Nothing about it was prepackaged. Whoever was next in line would ask for a wedge, and the clerk would cut it fresh, right there in front of you, wrapping it up neat in paper before handing it over. It was sold by the cut, weighed on the counter scale to the exact size a family needed. No more, no less, nothing wasted. There was something honest about watching your food cut to order like that, knowing exactly where it came from and who'd sliced it. Nobody sells cheese that way anymore, wheel and all, right out in the open for everyone to see. It's one more small piece of that general store nobody quite remembers, but so many of us were lucky enough to know. That's 10 now, but there were dozens more we could have named. The loose nails, the wax lips, the little card in the icebox window. Every town had its own version, its own smells, its own clerk who knew your family by name. Maybe that's the real thing we miss. Not the goods themselves, but the place and the people who ran it. So tell us, what did your local store sell that you haven't thought about in years? We'd love to hear it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this little walk back, stick around. We've got plenty more of these stories waiting for you.